All right, so I think one of the worst feelings in the world is going out and spraining your ankle and then thinking that you've done the rehab and you think that you're good to go back to whatever your sport is or going back to everyday life or whatever. And then right after you go back, you sprain your ankle again. And then you keep going through this cycle over and over and over again. And if this sounds like you, it was me for a really long time. My name is Matthew, and I was a Division I soccer player, and my ankle injuries ended my career. And now I'm dunking on a basketball hoop, playing as much soccer as I want, without worrying about my ankles really at all. And since then, I've helped more people than I can count with their ankle injuries and their ankle problems. So today I want to run you through 3 reasons why I think that people continue to sprain their ankles and sort of reasons why and what you need to do to sort of get over that hump. So I made these little images. I wrote them out on this iPad and I can scribble on them as well. So if you like this sort of video format, let me know down below or shoot me a message or whatever. I can keep making videos like this. If you don't like this and you like it more where I'm standing up and demoing things, we can do that as well. So just let me know what you prefer. So the first thing that I want to talk about is having sort of an unstable base. And you can see in this video here, in this image here, that your foot is a tripod. And I think it's really important to understand that your foot is a tripod and it really connects the ground in these 3 points. So the ball of your big toe, the ball of the little toe, and the heel in an ideal world are going to be the 3 main points of your foot contacting the ground. And then everybody sort of thinks of the arch of the foot, that main arch that runs from the ball of the foot to the ball of the big toe to the heel. And that's just one of the arches of your foot actually. You actually have 3 arches in your foot. So that is the medial longitudinal arch. The names aren't that important. They just describe where they're at. So that's the medial longitudinal arch. And then you actually have this arch on the outside of the foot, which is the lateral longitudinal arch. And then you have the arch that runs across your foot, which is the transverse arch. And these arches connect the different points of your tripod of your foot. So the ball of the big toe to the ball of the little toe is the transverse arch, and then you kind of guess which the medial and the lateral arches are. But one of the things that happened to me, it happens to a lot of people that I see after an ankle sprain, or even not after an ankle sprain, just after general issues with their ankles, or some people don't even have issues with their ankles. They develop this and then end up with issues with their ankles, and it could be from different shoes, it could be from whatever. But the tripod of the foot moves, and people stop putting pressure in areas that you would expect them to, and they end up putting pressure in areas that they shouldn't. So one of the one here in the middle here is what happened to me. So I lost sort of that connection with the outside of my foot after a whole bunch of ankle sprains because I had put so much stress and whatever tears, sprains, whatever issues with the outside of my foot, outside of my ankle, where you would normally sprain your ankle. And my body no longer trusted to put any weight there, to put any pressure on that outer edge of the foot. So my tripod ended up being sort of like this one in the middle, where I had a lot of weight on the big toe, and a lot of weight on this sort of inside of the heel. And then this third point of the tripod was either here or somewhere up on my toes. And you can see how much narrower this tripod is than what it should be. And if you think about like a tripod that this camera is on right now or whatever, the narrower that tripod is, the more unstable it is. So when you have sort of chronically unstable ankles, one of the things I see all the time is that people are putting all of their pressure either on the inside of the foot and the heel, or the outside of the foot and the outside of the heel. And then you can imagine how much less stable something that's closer to a line than an actual tripod is. And that's when you start to get, when you have the pressure on the outside of the foot, that's when you're going to get chronic sprains, and you get more and more and more sprains because you're pushing yourself to the outside, because you don't want to put any pressure on this inside of the foot, this ball of the big toe. You end up rolling and falling to this outside a lot. What happened with me was I didn't want to put any pressure on this outside of the foot. So I ended up putting a lot of pressure to the inside. And just because of the anatomy of the foot, you don't get so many, it's called an eversion sprain, where the bottom of your foot sort of tilts out away from the center line of your body. You don't get so many of those because there's kind of bones and there's a lot of things in the way. But what you do end up getting is sort of pain on the inside of the ankle. You get overuse, you get post-tib tendinopathy, tenosynovitis was one of the things I had. And you get that pain on the inside because all of these structures that aren't meant to actually hold your body weight all the time end up holding your body weight all the time. And then you start to get overuse injuries and things that just hurt and they bug you. Just because you have something like this doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad thing, but when you do have pain, you do have chronic instability, chronic sprains, different things like that, even Achilles tendinopathy, plantar fasciitis, all of these different things, a lot of times this will come along with it. So we need to get back to using the whole foot. And one of the ways that we do this is we just sort of force the ankle to force the foot to put pressure in these right areas. So one of the things that I did was I would work on a slant board, but not sort of forward and back. I would actually use the slant board. So if you look, if we imagine that this was my foot, and then we'll kind of go like that, really crude drawing. But instead of working on flat ground like this, I would actually put a slant board here and do exercises like that. So it would force me to roll down and put more pressure on this outside edge of the foot. And obviously you don't want to spend all your time there forever, and you want to gradually work back down to flat ground, but it's hard to really redevelop that connection without sort of outside assistance, like using a slant board or something. Or you can use mini wedges, you can use whatever. You can use a box stacked on another box pointed out to the side. It doesn't really matter, but we want to regain the connection with that. And a lot of people will have the opposite issue, and you need to work on getting back to the big toe. But this unstable base is one of the biggest reasons, because you're putting yourself in a position where you're forcing things to work. You're forcing your body to react quicker. You're forcing your body to generally keep you stable when you should have these, what you would call passive structures, keeping you stable. So that's the first one. Fix your base. If you fix the base, you're going to be in a lot better place than you were before. So the second one is when we're looking at proprioception. So proprioception is a really big, it's sort of a scary word, but proprioception really just means that you understand where your foot, where your ankle, proprioception works with the whole body, but we're talking about the foot and the ankle here. It's where your foot and your ankle is in space and how it is moving, really without it touching anything else. So it's the same, I think a good example of it is if I were to close my eyes, I can still tap my fingertips together because I have the proprioception in my hands and my fingers, that I know where they are in space, and I can sort of match those positions. It's the same thing with the foot and the ankle, and then we also sort of lump in how you feel and how you contact with the ground, but the more important thing here is sort of understanding the alignment of your foot. And this sort of goes along with the unstable base of understanding where your foot is in space and what's contacting the ground and how you're staying stable. But one of the things that happens is when you have an ankle sprain is really just a partial or a full tear of some of the ligaments in your ankles. So the ligaments hold your bones, connecting to bones. So, and you also, it's the same thing with tendons. If you have a sort of tendinopathy or you actually tear one of the tendons or something, you have little, and they're called mechanoreceptors. So basically they're just sensors in your muscles, tendons, ligaments, connective tissue, all of these different things. And they send feedback, they send information back up to your brain of like, this is where we are in space, this is where we're moving, all these different things that make up proprioception. That's what these mechanoreceptors do. You also have a whole bunch in the bottom of your foot. But the biggest part of this is that when you have, and you can kind of see it in this picture, when you have a tear, you actually damage a lot of these mechanoreceptors. So when you damage the mechanoreceptors, when you damage these sensors that gives the information back to your brain, you slow your reflex speed, you lose the positional awareness, you have worse balance, and then all of these culminate in an increased chance of injury and more sprains. So that's why there are some studies out there that looked at people with chronic ankle instability. So that's just people that continue to sprain and sprain their ankle over and over again. And the thing that they saw was that something like over 50% of these people didn't actually have anything physically wrong with their ankles. So there's something called mechanical instability and functional instability. So mechanical instability would be like if the ligaments on the outside of your ankle were just like way too long and way too loose, and they weren't able to like hold you in place. But that's like less than half of the people that have chronic ankle instability, and then that's sort of a different situation. You have to deal with that. But the other over 1 out of 2 people that have chronic ankle sprains don't actually have any of that physical limitation. So that means there has to be something else going on. And generally this is what it is. You've lost that ability to understand where your foot and your ankle is in space. Your reflexes are slower. So if you can imagine, if you're coming down and you land on somebody's foot and your foot starts to sprain, the faster that you can realize that's happening, the faster you can pull your ankle back into neutral, or you can pick it up off the ground and do whatever. But the longer it takes for you to realize that that's happening, the less advantageous of a position your ankle is going to be in. So you have more force that you're going to have to try and pull back out of, and it becomes really difficult at that point to stop that sprain. So if you've seen something like, there's a video out there of Victor Wembanyama, a basketball player, who you're like, oh, he's about to sprain his ankle there, and he kind of rolls into it, but he's able to pop back out of it, and he pulls himself out of it. He didn't consciously do that. That's a reflex from the foot and the ankle to pull him back out of that position and into sort of back into a neutral again and prevent that sprain and injury. If you have slower reflexes, your ankle's going to be on the ground by the time you realize, and you should pull out of that position. So reflex speeds means more load on the tissues, more load on the ankle that it's going to have to try and handle, and generally it can't handle it. You also lose that positional awareness. So when you think about understanding where your foot and your ankle is in space, if you don't realize that you're about to come down, you're about to hit the ground, and your ankle is turned out already, you're just going to hit the ground. And again, if you're about to hit the ground and you don't realize that your ankle is turned out into a spraining position, and you have slower reflex speeds, you're in a really bad position. As well, this all kind of culminates in worse balance as well. So when your balance is bad, you end up sort of falling to the side and dealing with all these things. So a lot of times people will say that they have bad balance, they feel unstable. That's generally this. This is generally the problem. This in combination with the unstable base is going to be your issue, and you end up with more and more sprains. So what I don't want to do is scare you in terms of like, I've damaged all of these mechanoreceptors, all these sensors in my ankle and all the other ligaments in my foot and ankle. You can get this back. You can rework on proprioception. Something like balancing on one leg with your eyes closed, or even just doing hops and doing different things and getting your ankle to a full range of motion, stimulating the ankle and giving it things to work through and think about. In the same way that if you were trying to grow your bicep, you would do more bicep curls and stimulate that muscle, make that muscle work. If we stimulate the mechanoreceptors, we make your ankle work and you make you understand where your things are in space and deal with that, you're going to be able to improve the mechanoreceptors as well. So the third and the final one is mobility. And these drawings are ridiculous, to say the least. But so the thing that I want to talk about with mobility is not, again, and whenever people say ankle mobility, people always go to calf. They always think about how tight is your calf, how far can I push my knee over my toe. But that is only part of your ankle mobility. So one of the easiest ways to test this is if you squeeze your arch and you squeeze your foot really hard and you try and push your knee over your toe, you're going to get nowhere near where you would be able to if you just had a relaxed foot. So I thought I was going to sneeze there, didn't sneeze. But after you have an ankle sprain, after you have these ankle issues, there's two ways that your foot can go in this, and it's overly pronating with the fault collapsed arch, or the more common one after ankle sprains is a really high arch and a really tight foot. Generally, you don't see chronic ankle instability and ankle sprains with a flatter arch, because when you have that flatter arch, it makes it harder to roll to the outside. When you have a really high arch, sort of like you can see in this picture in the middle here, it makes it much easier to roll. I don't know, it didn't describe which foot that is, so it makes it easier to roll to the outside in your normal ankle sprain position. So the problem is when you get into these positions all the time. So this is what we call supinated foot, and this is a pronated foot. And people think sort of pronation is the boogeyman of like, I'm overpronating. There's some 15-year-old in the running store told you you're overpronated and now you need these insoles. That doesn't really work. That's not what you need. It doesn't work, and that's probably not what you need. There's a difference between pronation and eversion, which is when the sole of your foot goes out to the side. Almost very few people overpronate, and the test for overpronation versus just weakness and eversion is if the ball of your little toe stays on the ground. If the ball of the little toe stays on the ground, it probably is pronation. If it comes off, you're no longer pronating. So the problem with this mobility is that when you sprain your ankle, your body sort of and your brain sort of thinks, all right, I need to protect this ankle, I need to protect this foot. And the way it protects it is through this supinated foot shape, which is also called a rigid foot shape. So if you try to protect it, it's going to tighten it up, put it into a rigid shape, and then you're not going to have to worry so much about the brain sees that tightness and that rigidity as a safe position for your foot. But the problem is that it just like, a lot of people just stay there and they never leave. And then the issue becomes this is a normal supinated foot shape. So when you're sort of, if you think about pointing at the top of a calf raise, or when your foot is out in front of your knee, you'll see that your arch gets higher like this. But people who have an overly supinated foot, who have chronic ankle sprains, will end up, when their shin comes forward, and then they look like, their shin looks like this. Let me just erase these. When their shin looks like that, they're still supinated versus this pronated position. So you have to think about your foot as an arch, but not as just a rigid arch, as an arch that, if we look at it, if I just draw like a really crude arch here really fast, an arch like this with not necessarily a solid base at the bottom, but a sort of like stretchy base. And then when you put this pressure down on the top of it, that arch is going to flatten out, and this bottom part is going to stretch. And then after you stretch it, so it's sort of like, if you've ever, I don't know how many people actually know what I'm going to talk about here, but you have those little plastic rubber semicircle things, and then you would push it down and it would sort of flip to the outside, and then you put it down and you'd wait, and eventually it would pop back and it would shoot up into the air. That's kind of what your arch is doing here. So we're loading the arch and it'll spring back up to the top. The problem is, if you never allow yourself to load that arch, you're never going to be able to spring back out of it. So if you're stuck in this supinated foot shape like that, you're just stuck there, and that's how you lose ankle mobility. Again, like we talked about in the beginning, if you squeeze your arch, you can't push your knee further forward, and this ends up putting way too much pressure on different areas. You're going to overly stretch your Achilles, and this is how a lot of people get Achilles tendinopathy, and you also end up leaning more to the outside and rolling to the outside of the foot, and end up with more sprains. And it's also just not a very explosive foot shape. So one thing you'll notice is, if you look at different elite athletes' foot shapes, LeBron James, Usain Bolt, Simone Biles, all these different people, if you see their foot, it looks way more like this than it does like that. Because that pronated, if you're already pronated, it gives you the room to push through the ground and be explosive out of it. If you're supinated, you just don't have the room, you don't have the ability to do that. So, not that a pronated foot shape is something that you are going to look for. You don't want that collapsed fallen arch, but you're very rarely going to see an elite level athlete with really supinated foot shape, because it does put you in more risk with ankle sprains, and it's less sort of biased towards being really explosive and really fast and really elite athletically. So those are sort of the three issues we want to fix. We want to work on your base of support, sort of how wide and how strong your tripod is. We want to work on your proprioception, your understanding of where your foot and your ankle are in space, and then along with that, and these all kind of blend together. It's like three different ways to look at one problem. And we also want to look at your foot shape and how you go between these different shapes. If you clear all those three things up, and then you sort of work your way back up to the sport, I guarantee it'll be way better than just resting or doing your little band drills and calf raises. Because so many people think that it's just a strength thing. And we've had a whole bunch of studies on this, and a lot of studies look at the strength of your inverter and everter muscles, so your post-hip and your pronaos on the side of your ankles, that you would think about as like, this is going to help me prevent sprains, like this is the strength on the inside and the outside of the ankle, as well as calf raises and tibialis raises and all these different things to strengthen the musculature around the ankle, even hops, jumps, different things like that. People think that that's all you need to do. That's like the whole thing, is just build a stronger ankle. But your ankle isn't your hamstring, it's not your hip flexor or something. Your ankle is much more complex, because there's like a billion bones in there. So the moral of the story is that there's a little more going on than just building strength and building springiness in the ankles, which is what I spent so long working on. And then I realized that all these other people that didn't have as strong of ankles, didn't have as mobile of calves as I did, didn't have as bouncy of ankles as I did, just didn't have any ankle problems, and I still had all kinds of ankle problems. So if you're looking for a resource on how to figure out exactly what you need for your ankles, I have a free video series on my school page about the 4 pillars that I think of as ankle ability, and you can go through, you can watch those videos, and then I also do weekly calls on the school page. So go ahead, join that down below, and if you've got any other questions, let me know. Thanks for watching, like, subscribe, all the other things, and I will talk to you guys soon.